Hey everybody, Mr. Regan here, and today we have a simulator question that's going to have us focusing on forces that occur within two sets of crashes. So the question we're looking to answer is which object or objects experienced the strongest force when the crashes occurred. So we have two objects here. We have object A and C at the very top experienced a crash, and then object B and D experienced a crash. And we have some information about C and D down here that will help us figure out which object or objects experienced the strongest force when the crashes occurred. So let's go ahead and take a look. If you notice, object C is lighter than object D. So object C has a mass of 1 kilogram, object D has a mass of 2. And if you notice here in our velocity data, both objects C and D started off with a velocity of 1. So they had the same velocity at the start. After the crash, they had a velocity of 3. So right now, after the crash, they're moving away from the objects A and B with a velocity of 3. So both of them sped up by a velocity of 2. So looking at these two crashes, we have to decide which object or object experienced the strongest force based on their weight and based on their velocity. So let's take a look at our options. First option is object B and D experience the strongest force due to D's mass and the same change in velocity as C. Okay. Option two, object C experienced the greater force because it's the lightest. And the last one, all four objects experience the same strength force because C and D changed velocities the same. Take a second, decide which one makes the most sense. Put your X in the column. When you're done, unpause the video to go over the answer. All right. Do we think we have it? Let's take a look. The key concept that helps us with this question is as follows. Even though the forces exerted on each object in a collision is the same strength. So we know that object A and C when they collide had the same strength. B and D had the same strength when they collided. If the objects have different masses, their changes in velocity will be different. So objects C and D here both have different masses. C has a lighter mass than D. And when we look at their velocities actually change the same. If these objects had the same forces applied to them, we would see the lighter object, in this case C, moving at a faster speed. So if these two crashes had the same strength forces, C would be moving faster than D because it's lighter. But we don't see that. We see that they have the same velocity, the same change. So we know that the second one doesn't make any sense. Next, all four objects experience the same strength force because C and D change velocity the same. Yes, they change velocity the same, but this is a lighter object, meaning the heavier object down here, if we're going to have it move as fast as the lighter object or have the same velocity as the lighter object, would need more force. So if D needs more force in that collision to move the same speed as C, then the answer is the first one. B and D both experience the strongest force due to D's mass and the fact that it changed velocity the same as C. To look at that in the simulator, we have our four objects. We have our velocities. C went from 1 to 3, changed by 2. D went from 1 to 3, changed by 2. And if we rewind, you'll notice that during the collision, the objects that had the greater force was B and D. They needed a larger force to move the heavier object versus the lighter force or the weaker force to move the lighter object. So that's the answers. If you have questions, reach out. Otherwise, good job.